Salt and your gut. How much you sprinkle on could have a massive impact on your health, and it starts with your microbiome. Let's nerd out nutrition style right now. It's the Exam Room Live. And welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hello, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so very much for raising your health IQ with us coast to coast around the world, more than 150 countries, and making this one of the most consumed nutrition podcasts anywhere on the planet today. And today we are focusing on salt. And when you think about salt and your health, you probably think about high blood pressure. You probably think about heart disease. But new research is showing that sodium's effects could actually begin in your gut. So the question is, can too much NaCl make an MESS out of your gut? It appears so. And to talk all about it, that science, how to clean up that mess, is the man who is a two-time New York Times best-selling author. He is the master of microbiome, the constipation conqueror, and an F-bomb machine. And by F-bomb, I mean fiber. He is the one and only Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, back for his monthly checkup with us. And if you have a question for Dr. B, drop it in the comments or chat. Let's fill up that doctor's mailbag. And with that, we welcome the man who is all good things for everything microbiome, Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. Good to see you, my friend.
Hello. It's great to see everyone. It's me, the Epic Dumps champion. It's me, Dr. B, the Gut Health MD, and we're here to talk about poop.
Well done, sir. Well done. I like you're stealing the hello bit. Like that's well done, man. I like that. Yeah, the slow pan.
I learned from the best.
And this is why, if you're listening to this podcast, you should also be watching it on YouTube. We've got you covered. It's all about the visuals and the facials when Dr. B is on the show. Man, good to see you again, and really cool to hang out with you recently in Vancouver at the Planted Expo, man. We had a lot of fun.
We had a lot of fun, and we ate some delicious vegan food, quite amazing pizza. And I just want to take a quick moment to, Chuck, mute your mic for a moment. I'm just going to say this. Everyone who's an Exam Room fan, this guy is incredible on the stage. Incredible. If I was going to assign a score out of 10 points, I'm giving it 25. That's how good it was. So I just want to say, if you've never had the chance to check Chuck live, put it on your bucket list. This is a must for everyone who's a fan of this show.
You are way too kind. Thank you,
dude.
Man.
You were amazing, man. I'm serious. I'm not just saying that because to fluff you up, even though we're buddies. Like you, dude, I was like blown away. You were fantastic. I loved it. And I'm like literally like I took like notes as you were doing your presentation. And I was like, oh man, I got to incorporate stuff like that in my stuff. So I'm working on it. I need you to teach me.
Every time you're on the show, I sit under your learning tree, so I am happy to return the favor, bud. Like, let's set it up, man. We will.
Well,
make you
it's
the
like this, dude.
master.
I spent 16 years studying medicine, right, in order to do this job. And during those 16 years, what were you doing? You were working a mic, man. And it shows.
Thank you.
It shows. You're phenomenal.
I appreciate that. You know what else I really enjoyed that weekend, beyond the food and just like seeing all of our friends and stuff, was like how many exam roomies came up to you and me and were like, you guys need your own show all the time. And it just like, I love getting that feedback, because what it says to me, Will, is that like people are having as much fun as you and I do when we're doing this thing. And they're just picking up on all of that. And that's an authentic thing. And I love that we got such positive feedback.
Charles, you just broke character. You called me Will. It's Dr. B when we're on the air here. Come on, buddy.
Charles? Sure. Well, all right. Who's breaking character now, William?
But it was kind of cool too. Like what I really loved is all the people who came up to us and they're like, can I get a picture with both of you at the same time? Like that was really cool.
Yeah. It was fun, man. It was a lot of fun. So thank you to Stephen and everybody at the Planted Expo for putting on such a phenomenal event. And it was great to be back in the great city of Vancouver. Cheap pop. And I can't wait to go back, man. It was a lot of fun. And really, by the way, I know you're a huge fan of sourdough bread. So free plug to Feast and Fallow and Stephen, who actually makes the sourdough bread there. We had the opportunity to sample that on Saturday night, and holy smokes, was that good sourdough.
Holy smokes. The stuff, so all the different dips, all the accoutrements that went with the sourdough were unbelievable. I kept going back for more. And the cool thing about sourdough from my perspective is that, so first of all, you can create a sourdough starter and it could live for hundreds of years. And that's not an exaggeration, by the way, that many of the bakeries that exist in San Francisco are using the original starter that they had back in like the 1850s. So, and the other thing is that the sourdough starter takes on, or the bread itself actually takes on the characteristics of the baker. And I think it's like a testament, not to get weird and sort of science fiction, because it's not even fiction. This is like, I'm here talking about how this is the truth. Um, but it's just like interesting to think about how, these microbes that are a part of us are really about our environment and an expression of our environment. And there's so many ways that this manifests, whether it's like time spent outdoors or the fact that we share microbes with the people that we live with. But I think that the sourdough bread in a way speaks to this, because like you put your hands into the sourdough bread, right? So you like make the bread, and as you do that, there's actually microbes that are becoming a part of this bread and create this special loaf. So not to get weird, because we're talking about our buddy Steven, and I don't mean to make it sound like I enjoyed the fact that it was specifically Steven's bread, but I think it's really cool. I think it's really cool how unique each loaf of sourdough bread is, and how this can be an expression of the microbiome of the baker.
The man definitely pours his passion into the bread. I'm not saying that I could taste Steven in the sourdough. I'm not sure that that would taste as good as the dough itself, but I'm
I
telling
feel
you,
like I set this off in a weird direction. Maybe
a
we
little
should we should
bit, a
start
little
this
bit.
episode over.
No, 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 no,
It's
no, no.
okay.
Let me do my thing
Thank you,
with my
everyone, for
years of
hanging with
experience.
us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bear with me. We're going to get to salt in just a second. But what I'm saying is, bottom line is, it is definitely worth a trip to Vancouver just to enjoy this bread. And what I'll do is in
Feast
the
and
show
Fallow.
description and in the episode notes, you will find a link to Feast and Fallow's website so you can
That's the
check it out
place.
for
Gotta hit it
yourself.
up when you when you go to
And
Vancouver.
by the way, the espresso, all planet there as well. Just
Mm.
so good. So good. Anyway, so here we are, 7.5 minutes into the show. We promised we were going to talk about salt in the microbiome, so I think we should get to it. But
Real
wait,
quick. I
yes,
just have to
sir.
say before since you mentioned coffee, be careful what sort of cans of worms you open up around me, Chuck.
I know you're
So
such a coffee guy.
I am such a coffee guy. You saw this on full display while we were in Vancouver together, which, by the way, is a coffee drinking town, right? And we had coffee drinking weather. So what do you
Yes.
expect me to do?
Drink coffee, of course.
I can just be myself. So anyway, but it was kind of interesting because I actually, from Feast and Fallow, picked up a bag of beans, and meaning coffee beans. And it's really cool because the way that I chose it is that the head barista, who's a super coffee nerd, he says to me, like, so what flavor profile do you like? And I'm like, well, what are my options? And he's going through all the options and he gets to funky. I'm like, tell me more. And it turns out that these coffee beans are partially fermented. Actually, I shouldn't even call it partially fermented. They're fermented. They're fermented. They're just not fermented for like a year, but they're fermented, which is where the funk comes from. Now, I'm going to have to report back next time I'm on the show, Chuck, because I haven't yet cracked open the bag. I just got back on like very recently. But once I crack open this bag and make my first French press, I will report back to the exam roomies and let them know about my funky coffee.
Yeah, and I think that because it's fermented, we need to know not just about the flavor profile, but the aroma. Does it also have a funky odor to it? I don't know.
I mean, if there's time, we could take a road trip, meaning like literally with my laptop computer, and I could go find where it is. I think it's upstairs in my suitcase. But anyway.
And I enjoyed also schooling you up about, speaking of funky coffee, the cat poo coffee, which is an actual thing too. People pay a premium to eat beans that have been eaten previously by a cat. They're then ground and turned into coffee. Just saying.
Pardon me, but I feel like a little bit like you have to. What just happened?
The cat eats the beans get roasted, the beans then get ground, people drink the coffee. I think that we can skip that part and just go right to roasting it.
Oh dear.
Yeah, anyway, whatever. Let's talk about salt in the microbiome. 9 minutes and 47 seconds now into the show. Hi, thanks for bearing with us. Most of us, Dr. B, are eating 1.5 times the amount of salt that we need every single day. Like we are salt junkies. So, what happens to the microbiome when we keep dropping salt bomb after salt bomb after salt bomb down our gullets?
Yeah, the irony is too is that one of the most popular things to do these days is actually to have an electrolyte salt drink, which
I see
I
even Gatorade has one now.
oh,
Like
Gatorade is nothing compared to these
uh,
salt drinks.
electro water. No, literally. It's like electro water. Have you seen this or whatever it's called?
Well, I think the Gatorade is playing off of the popularity of I'm not going to name any specific brands, but there are specific brands that like literally what they deliver is maximum salt. Literally maximum salt. What is the most salt that we can put into a beverage and not have you like be absolutely repulsed by it and throw up?
Ugh, that doesn't sound very good.
No, I mean
No.
it's like on par with cat poo coffee. So anyway, all right, moving on. So let's quantify this though, Chuck. So the recommended amount of sodium in the United States in terms of daily intake is 2,300 milligrams. The average American, as you mentioned, is consuming 3,400 milligrams. And if you were to take that average American and add one salt bomb beverage that I'm referring to, that beverage has an extra 1,000 milligrams. You'd get yourself up to 4,400, which is basically twice the recommended amount. So all you have to do is eat the standard American diet, add one of these drinks, and you are literally doubling your salt intake in terms of the recommended amount. And it has implications for our microbiome. So is it okay if we unpack this? It's a bit of a nuanced topic, Chuck.
Unpack it, baby. Let's do it, man. I got some science we're gonna get into, but you unpack it, you steer the ship, and I'll
Okay,
just
cool.
kind of wiggle in what I need to.
All right, let's start here. Let's start here and acknowledge, first of all, the forefathers of the plant-based movement who came up in the 80s and 90s, and they said to young bucks like you and I, who were kids, they said to us, salt, oil, sugar, right? This is where we need to be careful if you're an American. And you know what? I want to sit here and tell you they were absolutely correct. But the topic is a bit more complicated than just everyone needs to reduce salt all the way down to the absolute cellar basement, lowest possible. So this is the part of the nuance that I want to dig into and discuss. So if the average person is consuming 3,400 milligrams of salt, clearly the average person needs to reduce their salt intake. Before we talk more about this, let me start by sort of describing fermented foods as an analogy of the way in which salt works within our body. So if you try to make sauerkraut at home, you have to add salt. If you don't add salt, number one, the food is going to taste like absolute trash. But the second thing is that you have a almost guaranteed likelihood of having a bad ferment. So by not adding salt to the cabbage, you will develop mold. And this is a part of the reason why it's like nearly impossible. It's not just the flavor, it's also like trying to create sauerkraut that is delicious, good for you, and honestly, safe to consume. Very, very, very hard to do without salt. Yet, if you add an excessive amount of salt to this jar, you will not create anything at all. It will just be salty cabbage. It doesn't matter how long you give it, it doesn't matter how long it sits on your counter, it will just be salty cabbage. And it gets to the fact that salt is a preservative. So we don't necessarily like equate this or like acknowledge this when we're in the supermarket. But in the United States, the average person is like 60% of their calories comes from ultra processed food. Among our children, it's even worse. 70% of calories come from ultra processed foods in the United States. And I think we can all imagine, maybe you don't consume many of these, that's a good thing, but we can all imagine what our tongue feels like, and you can sense that saltiness. There's a tremendous amount of saltiness, and the reason why the salt is in there is because the salt helps to preserve the food. Chuck, I almost called you Charles, but you're I
We got to
love you
get you
too
out of
much.
that habit,
I love
man.
you
Yeah,
too much to do that to you on the
I
show.
appreciate you.
Um, Chuck, why would salt work as a preservative?
I don't know. I
Okay.
mean,
No, I'm so glad that you said this
yeah.
because that's what I expect people to say. And let's unpack that. So, thank you, Chuck.
You're
So,
welcome.
the reason is because preservation has to do with destroying microbes. Period. When food spoils, that's not like random decomposition. Okay? When food spoils, it's because bacteria and fungi are transitioning the food. So the microbiome of the food has changed and is now moving in a different direction as it moves towards like basically being broken down into soil. I mean, that's what, food spoilage is. It's the natural life cycle of food. It involves microbes. And if we want to break that cycle, the way that we do it is with preservatives. Preservatives that keep the microbes out. This is why we can do things like pasteurize our food, where we heat it up to such a degree that you have killed all the microbes, drop it into a heated up can that has been sterilized, and then seal it off as quickly as possible so that no microbes have a chance to even get in there. All right, that's what pasteurization is. Now, we're not talking about pasteurization, we're talking about salt and the fact that you can add enough salt to something to destroy the microbes. And now the microbes can't get in there because of the salt. And that is the preservation technique that is used for ultra-processed foods. So what I've presented to you so far, without even getting to your original question, Chuck, I mean, you have to be impressed
I'm always impressed when you're on the show, bro.
at the intensity of the tangent that I just took.
I mean, it is good, and I can't wait to like come back at you about this because I already have the follow up here. But please
All right.
continue.
Well, it might be like 15 or 20 minutes before we get to that point, so you might want to write it down. But nonetheless, so the point that I'm trying to make here is that number one, salt clearly impacts microbes. All right, too much salt or excessive amounts of salt destroys microbes, harms the microbes. Yet there are situations where there is a window of salt intake that actually is preferred. So it's not necessarily that it's this thing where the absolute least salt possible is the absolute best. There is a place that exists where there's an optimal amount of salt intake that is optimal for our microbes. Recognizing that the average person in the United States is consuming 50% more salt than they should, then our public health recommendations clearly need to be that we reduce our salt intake. But that doesn't mean that our recommendation needs to be that for a person who has already optimized their salt intake, because again, there is an optimal. It doesn't mean that for that person, we need to recommend that they reduce their salt intake down to zero, which by the way is impossible, and you would die. But nonetheless, I don't mean to be morbid. So quick, before we open this up to you, Chuck, and to questions from the audience, let's just stop speaking tangentially and let's just get straight to the facts. Microbiome, salt, what happens? Okay, when you expose microbes to salt, you destroy lactobacillus. And lactobacillus are bacteria that have been known to produce short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are the most anti-inflammatory. I've talked many times on the show about them. They're the most anti-inflammatory compound that I've ever come across in my more than 20 years of study in medicine. So what I'm saying is that excessive salt intake actually disturbs the microbiome to reduce your short-chain fatty acid production. Now, by the way, I'm sure we've noticed the obesity epidemic correlating to the excessive intake of ultra-processed foods that are high in salt. 70% of our salt comes from UPFs. So, but obesity, it's not just the only thing that's affected by short-chain fatty acids. Chuck, it turns out that our blood pressure, we think that the connection between salt and blood pressure is not just that salt raises the salt level in your blood, and therefore your blood pressure goes up, we think that the reason why salt raises a person's blood pressure is by disturbing the microbiome. Because short chain fatty acids have been clearly shown when we produce more short chain fatty acids, we lower our blood pressure. And this has been like quite proven in fiber studies. In fact, we found this in our Zoe method clinical trial that we did. We found that when people increased their plant intake, they lowered their blood pressure. Okay, so this idea that salt and blood pressure are connected, they are absolutely connected, but in between that connection exists the microbiome. And let's not ignore that, because that's an important part of this entire equation. This is not a black box anymore. It used to be a black box years ago. This, we now have a vision to what's actually happening between when you consume that ultra-processed food and then your blood pressure goes up. And what we're finding is that it's the microbes that are the story. That is the story. That's what has brought this into focus, where we can now see it. And it's no surprise that people who consume more salt in their diet have lower diversity of their microbiome, because when you excessively consume salt, you are destroying the beneficial microbes. And if they're being suppressed and we can't find them, they're nowhere to be found, they're not detectable by our labs, then of course your diversity decreases. And unfortunately, when people decrease their diversity, this is also what is associated with diabetes and obesity and autoimmune disease and allergic disease and a number of other health conditions. We could keep going.
Yeah. All right. So
Mic
that
drop.
makes that, yeah, man, that's, whew, boy, that just takes me right back to what it was, I talk about when I go on the stage and I tell my story is, walking people through just what my daily menu used to look like. And as you know, I go through that Taco Bell order.
Talk
And
to us, Chuck. Talk to
when
us,
you,
Chuck.
when you tally that up, it, forget even just the fat and the calories. We'll just go straight to the sodium. Like that was over 10,000 milligrams of sodium in one meal. And no wonder then, if you're talking about the microbiome being altered by the sodium intake, no wonder then my blood pressure was 180 over 100, and that was with being prescribed beta blockers. So clearly the pills weren't that effective. Of course, I was eating also pizza and taquitos and a whole lot of Boston Market as well. So I was getting probably somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 20,000 milligrams of sodium every single day. I
Yeah.
mean, I would think it would be impossible not to have some really whacked out microbiome when you're eating that much sodium based off of the results of the study you're talking
Yeah,
about.
well, and talk to us about how what you were going on. So that's your blood pressure. We've isolated that, but we're saying that you're way excessively consuming salt intake. And obviously there's more to this story, because it's not just salt that you were eating, it's a lot of fast food, a lot of ultra processed foods. But talk to us about what was happening with your weight, how you were feeling, what was your mood, where were you at?
Just I was a miserable guy. I mean, my weight just kept going up and up and up and up, eventually peaking at 420. I was pretty much depressed. I mean, I had the classic angina type symptoms as well, major sleep apnea. I was just a wreck. I
What was
mean,
your
head to
relationship
toe.
with food, Chuck? What was your
It,
relationship with
it
food?
was the best relationship I had. It was also the most toxic. It was my day revolved around food. I was like, when I say that I was a food addict, I mean I was a full blown fast food, ultra processed food, junk food junkie. I mean, that's just the way that it was. I would literally schedule my day around it, hide the fact that I was eating as much as I was. I was ashamed of it. It was ruining my health. But at the end of the day, I still couldn't stop myself, and I had to go to great lengths to break that addiction. It was the best relationship I had and the worst relationship, because it would give me that high, that rush every single time, but then I'd feel like crap the rest of the day. Absolutely.
Chuck, what would happen if you just went cold turkey and broke up with Taco Bell?
It's funny you should say. I can tell you exactly what happened to me. It was no different than going through withdrawal if you were coming off of drugs or alcohol. I felt sick physically. I felt depressed. I had major anxiety and rage, and it was horrible. And that was just like 3 days. Like 3 days I got so upset because I hadn't had it. I got started punching my fist through doors and walls. Like that's insane to me, but that's what it was like. And And when you talk to people who go through detox off of drugs or alcohol or what we consider to be, the traditional or classic substances of abuse, the story really isn't that much different from what I went through for junk food. It's wild.
So if we take a step back, and thank you for sharing that, Chuck, and we take a step back and we look at this bigger picture of what you just presented to us in your personal story as one person, I think it's quite powerful because basically what you have told us is that you were consuming in excess of 10,000 milligrams of salt per day. And just to reorient towards the number, what I've said is that the recommended amount is 2,300 milligrams or less per day. So were quadrupling this intake. And I have made the argument that what happens when we excessively consume our salt is that we inflict harm on the beneficial bacteria that produce short chain fatty acids. And therefore, we are depriving our body of the benefits of short chain fatty acids. And that can manifest with an elevation of our blood pressure, which you have verified for us. But we also know that a low gut diversity and the absence of short chain fatty acids is also associated with obesity and metabolic disease and mood disorders, including major depression, but a full spectrum of mood disorders. And you have verified those things for us as well. And the other thing, this is less, we require more research to completely verify this, but there is evidence to suggest that our gut microbes are also involved in our addiction or our cravings, our food cravings. This has actually been shown with chocolate. Some people absolutely crave chocolate, can't get enough of it. And others are kind of like, I could do with or without it. And we think that it's the gut microbiome that is part of what motivates this. And it kind of makes sense because these microbes are trying to preserve themselves. Because if they're not fed, then they won't exist. And when you have a microbiome that has been scarfing down Taco Bell every single day, they're expecting you to continue to deliver Taco Bell. And if you don't deliver Taco Bell to them, then they want to make you feel unwell and punish you. And those are the withdrawal symptoms that you were going through, like detoxing from drugs.
Mm.
And so I thank you, Chuck, for sharing this, because I think for the many people who are here with us today in person, they get to hear this and it connects the dots where sometimes the science does feel like a black box. But when we humanize it and we hear a person come forward with their story, and then you see that just verifies everything that we're seeing in our research, it's powerful.
Yeah, man. Man, I wish that we had a lot more time. We've got maybe 5 minutes or so. We're a little time limited today here. But
this is still one of the best episodes we've ever done together.
it's an authentic one for sure, man. The other thing that this research talked about in the Washington Post article was kind of what you've alluded to, but not come straight out and said, is that this also impacts our immune system because of the way that it's kind of being suppressed. You were talking about lactobacillus, and I know that goes hand in hand with the immune system as well. And then again, I don't want to make this about me, but I just do know anecdotally, when I was overweight, I was forever being sick, man. I mean, like the running gag was how thick could I get the folder at the doctor's office? This was before they digitized everything and had it on the computer. She would come in with this folder that was as thick as an encyclopedia of my various visits and illnesses and things like that. I was forever sick with chronic sinusitis and strep throat. Those were the two big ones I would get time and time and time again, man. So I would imagine that the sodium has something to do with that as well.
Well, so the immune system cannot be separated from our gut bacteria, our gut microbes, which also include yeast. But the immune system cannot be separated from these things. And it turns out that our gut microbes, they train the immune system, and they also communicate to the immune system directly. And the principal form of communication that allows the immune system to function in an optimal fashion, and let me come back to that word optimal in a moment. The principal way in which the microbes ensure that our immune system can function in an optimal fashion is due to short-chain fatty acids. So when we deprive our body of short-chain fatty acids, then we are in a way asking the immune system to become archaic and disorganized. So when I use the word optimal with the immune system, the reason why I use that word instead of stronger, better, bigger, whatever, the reason why is because optimal means precise and targeted, and it knows when to activate, and it's not too much. And these are important ideas because when we have an excessive immune system, that could be autoimmune disease, that could be allergic disease, that could be like seasonal allergies and asthma and things like this. On the flip side, you're describing what is an inadequate immune system. And an inadequate immune system is associated with difficulty handling infections, being prone to more infections, or even, and not to be scary, but being prone to cancer. And these are the reasons why, Chuck, we see that fiber is preventative against everything that I just mentioned on the two sides, right? Too much and too little. Fiber is preventative against both of these things because fiber helps to organize our gut microbiome, which helps to organize our immune system. So there's this gut immune connection that's so powerful. And I think that the takeaway here, one of the takeaways, quite simply, if we break this down, excessive salt intake is going to negatively impact the benefits that you get from fiber. So you could eat a very plant-based diet, but if you are pounding the salt, you're going to be in trouble.
Now, we know that, let's take a question from Bob. Actually, open up the doctor's mailbag here, grab Bob's question. He's wondering, if eating that fiber can help kind of offset the effect that salt would have, kind of in the same way that, eating an apple, which has a lot of natural sugar in it because it's got a lot of fiber in there as well, that will prevent you from having that big glucose spike. So could fiber do the same thing for salt?
So the short answer for Bob is yes, fiber could do the same. The problem is that 70% of our salt is coming from ultra-processed foods, which are devoid of fiber. So you'd have to basically say, I'm not going to eat ultra-processed foods, I'm going to eat plants, but when I eat plants, I'm going to add a ridiculous amount of salt to them. And it would be more than your palate would want to possibly consume. So it would be quite unnatural in order to do that. That being said, yes, in theory, fiber would help to offset some of these things, but what we are better off is optimizing, which means getting to an optimal level. Again, the word optimal meaning not too much, not too little, an optimal level of salt intake in association with an increase of our fiber intake.
All right. Sally is wondering whether we should be looking to eat higher potassium foods as opposed to higher sodium foods to help mitigate some of these effects as well.
Yeah, the answer is yes. And the reason why is because potassium, this has to do with the way that the kidneys function, and there's specific channels within the kidney that either are going to absorb sodium or absorb potassium. So it's sort of this either or thing. So one of the ways in which that we can promote the excretion of sodium is by consuming more potassium.
All right, let's see if we can grab one or two more really quickly. Harry, can water dilute sodium and make it less impactful? So if you're eating one of those UPFs that's got a ton of sodium, if you just follow that with a bunch of water, not that fancy salt water you were talking about, but just a lot of water, can that dilute it and make sure that your blood pressure stays down, your microbiome stays in check?
So I would say within the way that you just described it, Chuck, the answer would be no. But yet I want to zoom out and make the answer yes. So would I advocate for people just drinking a ridiculous amount of water with ultra-processed foods in order to be healthy? Absolutely not. Yet, let's ignore the salt aspect of things and your salt intake for a moment. And let's just think about water consumption. There are people who may have a medical issue that leads them to consume an excessive amount of water. Or there are people who drink too much beer, and it can actually drive down blood sodium levels, and that can be actually quite dangerous. They call it beer drinkers' potomania. I actually have diagnosed this a few times throughout my career. So it is possible to drive your sodium levels so low that actually you feel intoxicated. And this has been known to be done by some people who are actually locked up in jail, because if you want to get out of jail, which they do, then you can actually get yourself to the hospital, which is a change of pace. by basically just consuming water to the point of driving your sodium so low that it's dangerous. And then they have to basically move you to the hospital to get you reoriented. So the answer is yes, but please don't do anything along the lines of continuing to consume ultra processed foods and then drinking more water. That doesn't make sense.
Good tip. Or also, don't commit a crime.
Yeah,
it
was a little different than you were expecting, huh?
Yeah. How about that? Lastly, here's an interesting one from Brenda. Are the recommended sodium intake levels for maintaining healthy gut microbiome the same as that RDA? So is 2,300 milligrams, is that good to go for the microbiome, or would you suggest maybe even backing that down slightly?
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Brenda. These standards, we don't have specific thresholds that we have defined in terms of the gut microbiome. What we do know is that relative to this threshold of 2,300, excessive salt intake is associated with these negative impacts on the gut microbiome. So in terms of advocating that people back that down from 2,300 to a lower number based upon the microbiome alone, I don't have data to say that a person who has a sodium intake of 2,100 or 2,200, that's less than 2,300, to say that they're also causing harm to their gut microbiome. I don't have any evidence to say that. So it's hard for me to make an advocacy for that. I just try to be sensible with this, Chuck. Can I just be honest? I just try to be sensible with this. So do we have to be zero salt? No, we definitely do not need to be zero salt. We can prepare a delicious plant-based meal, and we can add the appropriate amount of salt and pepper to season it, to make it taste good. And you are not exceeding 2,300 milligrams of salt by doing that. And you can add a reasonable portion of fermented food to what you're eating. And you are not going to exceed 2,300 milligrams in doing this. And I think this is where I'm advocating for people to be, as opposed to the idea of zero salt is where we want to be. That's not feasible. That's not possible. And I also don't think that's actually healthy.
All right, man. I wish that we had more time, but we're going to go ahead and close up that doctor's mailbag and look forward to our next visit next month with you, where we'll get another gut checkup, man. What's crack-a-lacking with you, man? Anything cooking at theplantfedgut.com or with DMN? What's happening in the world of Dr. B?
Well, I haven't publicly announced anything on this, but I am here in the exam room, and this, y'all know this is my favorite. This is my favorite place here, Chuck.
We love you too, buddy.
Yeah, the host, the people, y'all are great. So 38 Terra has been once a month opening up the store just for a short period of time. Boom, we sell out. That's all we have. See you next month. That's the way that it's been the last few months. I'm excited to share that we are moving very quickly towards opening up completely in the United States. We're going to have a brand new website. This website is going to have bells and whistles, meaning that we have a lot of exciting things that we've added to it that are going to enhance the experience for our potential consumers and for our consumers. We want our customers to be satisfied, to have a great experience, to match what I believe is a fantastic product. So, and that's coming up really soon. I don't want to give a specific date, but if I were the people listening to this call, I would look at the last week of June, so there's 30 days in June, right? So I would look within that last week of the 23rd through the 30th, somewhere in there. And if you want to be the first to know, come to 38terra.com, sign up for our email newsletter, and I will be the first to let you know when we are opening up the store and we are ready to rock with all these different things.
That's a big time nugget right there, my friend. That's a big time nugget right there. That's a knowledge bomb you just dropped on us, man. So what we're going to do, we've got that link for you over to the website in the show description and in the episode notes. Sign up and be in the know. Dr. B, man, looking forward to the full launch, man, but really grateful that you were here today.
So fun. This was a great episode. It was a little bit short, so I apologize. I have to run, everyone, but it was so great. It was great to see everyone. Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, everyone else.
Thank you, Dr. B. Go ahead and jump off. I'll do the sign off. I know that you got a heart out because you are a very busy, busy man. So thank you once again to Dr. B for being here and raising our health IQs. Cool correlation there between sodium intake and the microbiome and all kinds of things. All great things. Love it when he's here to raise our health IQ. And don't forget, big happenings in Washington, D.C., August 15th through the 17th. The International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine headlined by Dr. Dean Ornish this year, talking about his brand brand new groundbreaking research on Alzheimer's disease, potentially reversing its effects. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be recording episodes all 3 days of the conference. Just can't wait. So August 15th through the 17th, head over to pcrm.org/ICNM right now to reserve your seat today. Also going to be joined by Dr. Gemma Newman, Dr. Neil Barnard, Dr. Christopher Gardner, Dr. Alan Desmond, so many others. You can be there too, pcrm.org/ICNM, and we hope to see you in Washington, D.C. And for today, that is all the time that we have, my friends. Thank you to the crew behind the scenes for making the magic happen. And to you exam roomies, thank you so very much for being here and raising your health IQs right alongside of us. And for everyone at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. We will talk to you again very soon. But until then, keep it plant-based.